Today's debate is on question 2, whether to eliminate the 10th grade MCAS exam as a graduation requirement. Voting yes on question 2 would diminish the state's role as a gatekeeper on high school graduation. Students would still need to take the 10th grade MCAS exam, but would no longer need to pass in order to graduate. Local districts would set their own criteria for graduation, informed by state education standards, but not tied to any formal state assessment. Voting no on question 2 would keep the status quo. MCAS would remain a graduation requirement for kids here. Unlike other days when your calls and comments are taken immediately after the debate, as Marjorie said, today at 11:40 we're going to be talking on Zoom with Sonny Williams, the commander of the International Space Station. So that means if we have time, we'll take a few questions right after, but the bulk of your questions, comments, thoughts on question 2 will come in the noon hour. Joining us now from the yes side is Deb McCarthy. She's vice president of the Massachusetts Teachers Association. Deb, it's great to meet you. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
And from the no side, Keri Rodrigues is the founder of the National Parents Union. Keri, it's great to have you too.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure.
So, Deb, let's start with you. Why do you support question 2?
So, great question. Thanks for inviting me here.
Pleasure.
So, I'm an educator for 25 years in the classroom. When the MCAS first came out, I was known as the MCAS guru in my building. I believed in the promise of ed reform, but over time, the impact did not match the intent. And rather than getting the science lab in Hull that students in Wellesley got, we still haven't gotten it. And instead of it addressing an opportunity gap, it's now become an opportunity chasm. The other thing that I think is really important is there is a certain profile of learners who are repetitively harmed time and time again. We know this. The data reflects it. People say, well, we got to do things differently, but nobody is. And so by going to the ballot, we were able to collect more than 170,000 signatures in the fall, and we had no problem in the spring meeting that metric. So that's why I'm here.
Keri, why should people vote no?
Because this is about keeping our promise to the children of the Commonwealth, and this is how we do it, is by making sure that every child in Massachusetts gets that constitutionally protected right to a high-quality education. And by giving every child in Massachusetts the same test, we can determine where the inequities lie so that we can make sure that as a Commonwealth, we're making the right investments in schools and in situations that need help, that need additional resources, and kids that are not getting access to that high-quality education. It's how we keep that promise. It is how we ensure that every child in Massachusetts is going to be able to access economic mobility.
Deb, just so people are clear, Deb McCarthy from the yes side, we have 351 cities and towns. Should you prevail and the voters of Massachusetts embrace a yes vote, we'll have 351 graduation standards, essentially, right? No uniform statewide standard for graduation. Is that factually accurate?
I strongly disagree.
Why is that?
Because in Massachusetts, we have mandated frameworks. And as educators, we must teach to the frameworks. Our lesson plans are aligned to the standards. Our curriculum is aligned to the standards. Our report cards are aligned to the standards. And we are evaluated quite rigorously according to these standards. And
by the way, just on that note for a second, I looked for those standards this morning. Other than gym, civics, and some history thing, I couldn't find them, for whatever it's worth. Let me just finish.
I will.
Number 2, I don't see who oversees them. I don't see who enforces the standards if they're not met. So fill me in, if you would.
Great question. From DESE this morning. We have frameworks in health and physical education. It's a 54-page document. World language, 47 pages. We have art standards.
What happens when a local district doesn't comply?
Well,
Isn't that really the issue, enforceability?
Another really good question. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Again, right from DESE this morning. Right now, 100% of 165 schools are reporting that their students comply with the MassCore requirements. Currently, 266 districts are meeting that metric at 85% of the students.
Okay, let's stop
Sometimes
there just for a second. Are you satisfied with that?
No, not at all, because what we're talking about is inputs. We're talking about exposure to curriculum. And we hope that folks do a good job, but we really don't have any check and balance around outputs, whether or not our kids, having been exposed to these frameworks, actually are proficient in the subjects as promised. This is the problem. It's great, we're talking a lot about like the trade-off is gonna be, well, you know, we'll make sure everybody gets MassCore, which is another framework in the hopes that every kid will have access to a high quality curriculum. Access and exposure is not actual proficiency. Making sure kids, by the time they leave K through 12 education in Massachusetts, are proficient in these subjects is the promise, and that's what we need to do here.
I think
Just
Deb
a
should
quick,
I'm sorry.
fact check here. Half of Massachusetts high schools don't require MassCore, 4 years of English, math, phys ed, 3 years of science, et cetera. So it's not enforced, obviously.
Well, I got my information from the Department of Education's webpage. You can go on there and get it. That's where I got all
Yeah.
this information from this morning. So
Yeah, the
But how
Boston-
about, but Deb, forget Desi just
Yeah.
for a second. The point that Keri's making, I think it'd be good for you to respond to, even if the standards are there, as you're suggesting a minute
they
ago.
are.
Well, even if you're there, she raises the issue is how do we know that kids are proficient in those areas after, even if all those standards are met? How do we know that?
So let's be clear, the MCAS aren't going anywhere, all right? And what is really clear to me is the disconnect between what actually happens in our classrooms. You can walk into any kindergarten classroom, and there are I can objectives that are aligned with the standards. Educators are evaluated on these standards. I have to select power standards where I have to show the assessments. We have online portals that are aligned with the MCAS where that data.
Can we just stop for the
Yeah.
first? The first thing I think is worth responding to. MCAS, we should have made this clear up front. MCAS is going nowhere, including
Right.
the 10th grade MCAS. It's just not a graduation requirement. So why doesn't that, as Deb say, Keri, test the proficiency that you're worried about?
Because if you're telling kids that they do not need to pass the MCAS in order to graduate, what level of effort are they going to put in to the actual requirement itself?
dependent on the teacher?
Well, I would argue, well, what if we start telling 10th graders who also take Massachusetts driving tests that all you have to do is be exposed to really high quality driver's ed curriculum, and we're going to give you the best teachers, and we're going to put stuff on the walls that tells you what the standards are, but we're not going to make you pass the test, because you know what? We're just going to trust that just by osmosis, by being near this data, we're going to assume that you're a great driver. We would never do that.
We're talking
it
about
doesn't make any sense.
That's the voice of Keri Rodrigues, founder of the National Parents Union. She wants you to vote no on question 2. Deb McCarthy, the vice president of the Mass Teachers Association, wants you to vote yes.
You know, Keri, Deb is a teacher, been a teacher for a long time. A lot of teachers, I think most teachers, are not in favor of the graduation requirement for MCAS. So why doesn't a teacher know better than me or Jim or just regular parents?
Well, I wouldn't argue that most teachers are in favor of getting rid of MCAS. We've had hundreds and thousands of teachers actually speak out saying that MCAS is important, that they actually tailor what happens in the classroom based on the lot of the information and the data that we get in terms of whether or not we are using research-backed curriculum, whether or not our curriculum is actually effective, our lesson plans are effective. And listen, I have a lot of respect for teachers and their expertise, and I think their voices are important in this conversation, which is why the MCAS test itself is created by teachers that are members of the Massachusetts Teachers Association. 250 of them every single year help to create the MCAS exam. There are 2 different committees that vet it to make sure that it's not biased, that the questions are accurate, all of this. So the MTA is actually a deep part of creating this assessment to make sure that it is effective and it is important for our kids.
You want to respond, Deb?
Yeah, 2 points. One, I want to go back to the driver's license. It's one of my favorite analogies. My mother was in the first class of women to graduate from Boston College, triple major, straight A student. She aced her driver's exam, the written exam, aced it. She was not a good driver. And as an educator, I know firsthand that I have students who are really good at knowing the content, but they're not good test takers. And so that's my first point. Second of all, it's not just the Massachusetts Teachers Association. It's AFT, it's BTU.
That's the other teachers union.
Right, the
for
other
those who don't know.
teachers union, we have endorsed this, but it's also the Massachusetts Association of School Committees, the Massachusetts Parents Teachers Association, AFL-CIO.
Deb, you know who has not endorsed this?
Yes.
No, if I may, the Attorney General was with us yesterday. She graduated from
Yep.
Boston
Boston Public Schools, yep.
She said no.
Yeah.
The governor, who your union endorsed for
Yep.
governor, said no. What's
Tutwiler, who's
The
the head
lieutenant
of
governor, the Senate
if I
president,
can,
the Speaker of the House.
Why would somebody who you thought was the best choice to be governor go against your guidance unless she thought Governor Healy or the Attorney General thought that these tests were critical for kids' success?
So, two really important points. This ballot measure is being supported by parents, educators, community activists, and students. Two, we met for more than 7 weeks with Patrick Tutwiler, and we came pretty close to almost having a legislative solution. And there was a lot of alignment and agreement that we are not doing things right. And from a report that Patrick Tutwiler and Russell Justin are on,
Who's
and this-
Russell? Who's Russell?
he's the acting commissioner.
Okay.
While
Thank you.
most students will meet this, nearly all who fail are English language learners, students with disabilities, or students without an adequate course preparation. It is important to note that 85% who never pass it are ELL learners and students with disabilities.
Excuse me, I want Keri to respond to that. It's very
Yeah.
important. But before she does, you didn't respond to my question. Your endorsed candidate for governor, the person you thought best to lead the Commonwealth, among other elected leaders in the state, as we said, the Attorney General yesterday, said this is a bad idea. What does she not know that you do? Doesn't she care about the kids of the Commonwealth?
I'd love to have a conversation with her firsthand.
But what do you
because-
think? I mean, you endorsed her.
What do I think about why?
Her deciding that her taking the
Well, then
position that
this is
a
what
no
I
vote
think.
is the correct
Honestly,
vote.
she is not standing beside the educators in Massachusetts. She is not standing beside the Massachusetts Association of School Committees. She is not standing beside the Massachusetts Parent Teachers Association. She is not standing beside AFL-CIO. She is not standing beside the 170,000 who signed the signature in the fall, or the
Do you regret your endorsement?
I'm not here to talk about endorsements. I'm here to talk about the ballot question.
What do you want to respond,
Well,
Keri?
the fact of the matter is, I think the governor, the lieutenant governor, the Senate president, the Speaker of the House, the Secretary of Education, all of these folks, and every single day there are more and more people coming out saying this is not a good idea. We couldn't even get the mayor of Boston on the record to say one way or the other because of political pressure here. But I think what they understand is the significant impact this is going to have not only on the children of the Commonwealth, who are going to be handed a piece of paper at the end of 12 years of education that is almost meaningless because it's a participation trophy, it is a certificate of attendance, and we are not keeping the promise. So that kids who leave K through 12 education, the Boston Globe did a series on valedictorians who are not even capable of taking college-level courses and have been struggling in the current system. We're not doing enough now, we need to be doing more. But moving forward, the idea that we are going to fly blind and hope based on vibes that our kids are going to be ready for the jobs and the economy of the future, what is going to
Just one
happen
more.
Go
to
ahead, go ahead.
workforce in
So-
the Commonwealth? We as parents are not just here for that moment that we get to be handed that diploma, or our child is handed that diploma. We have to worry about whether or not kids can get to college, whether they can take those college level courses, because if you don't, you have to take remedial courses. You can't pass an aptitude test to become an apprentice in the IBEW. You have to have math skills, reading skills, proficiency in these
Deb,
things.
Deb wants to
Deb,
respond.
go ahead.
So, this one is a really important talking point, Keri. The reason Massachusetts is #1 has nothing to do with the MCAS. That's a snapshot in time. It's a data point. It is because we have a highly educated workforce. Educators have to get licensed. They have to get their master's within 5 years. They have to get recertified every 5 years. There is a rigorous evaluation process, and the reason that we are #1 is because of this highly educated workforce. Students, GPA, and a rigorous coursework is a stronger indicator than a one-time test score.
You know what I wonder about too is I'm old enough to remember that before the MCAS, urban schools and schools that dealt with kids of color, English as a second language, kids with disabilities, were doing a horrible job. I talk about coming from one.
Yep.
In educating their kids. You know, the Wellesleys you didn't have to worry much about because they also have wealthy parents. But one of the good things, features of the graduation requirement, is that if you don't pass the test, then you get to take the test 4 times again during high school. You get intense help passing the test, and you can also take it again after high school, as you know. So if you prevail, what happens to those kids that don't pass the test? Is that intense tutoring and help going to continue, or is that out the window?
Well, because the test score will no longer be the metric. The test only measures 43% of the standards, right? And so I like when we talk about the opportunity, because for some, they leave our public schools and go to private schools and Catholic schools because they don't have to meet that metric, right? So what will happen is we will defang the high stakes of this snapshot in time. The data will be used for what it was meant to all along, and we will allow students the opportunity to, and real quick, but one of the students
So
in
well,
our
hold on,
commercial,
this is
yeah,
important. So they're not going to get that extra help at the
of
4
course
tests.
they get that extra help, but
So
it won't be.
you've
But it
written
will be
that
to
into
all
the
the
deal?
standards. It's to all the standards. Kids get this extra help all the time. But what
Well-
happens is, if you're that student,
We'll
like
get
one
to
of the
you,
ones in
Keri.
our
Yeah.
commercials, who misses it
Yeah,
by 1 point
yeah,
as a freshman, her
Yeah.
biology,
yeah.
she couldn't take the course that she wanted. She was denied it. She had to take a remediation course. She missed it again by 1 point. Finally, her junior year, she does pass it. But her best friend talks about the low self-esteem. This was a student who had a B average. But she lost 2 years of high school instruction based upon what she wanted to do for a pathway.
Okay.
You know,
based-
before Keri responds, I'm sorry, you want to
I was
say
just going to say, I was concerned about what happens for children who don't pass that they get just graduated,
No.
and then where do they go to get that education?
We should add to Keri, before you respond, just a little fact insertion here. Roughly 700 kids per year have their graduation held up. So we're talking roughly 1% of the
Right.
seniors in the state. Keri, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I was actually part of the last generation just before MCAS was mandatory, and watching what happened to kids in my class who were passed along, who were functionally illiterate, who couldn't get out of the first semester of Bunker Hill Community College, because I went to school in Somerville, and watching how their lives played out, because they were handed a diploma. We
Yeah.
were said that you're ready to go. They were not ready to go. They couldn't even get into a trade program. Those were not promises kept. A lot of those kids passed away from substance abuse and issues of poverty and a whole host of issues. The reason why we are #1 in the nation for education is because we assess. We look for the inequities and we course correct. We cannot do that without data. We cannot just guess and based on vibes decide how we are going to allocate resources. And this has been an ongoing conversation. What I really want to bring up is the fact that, again, it is 700 kids that do not successfully pass the MCAS as a graduation requirement. That is not a punishment. That is a call to action. Those are kids that need resources, that we need to remediate, that need help, that need assistance. This is data that's actionable for us, that we should be actually helping those kids out.
Keri, I want to get to something. Deb, can you raise your mic about an inch a little bit? Just perfect. That's
Like
great.
that?
You know, a minute ago, Deb, and we're talking to Deb McCarthy, who's the Vice President of the Mass Teachers Association. She wants you to vote yes on question 2. Keri Rodrigues is the founder of the National Parents Union. She wants you to vote no. Deb a minute ago said a critical thing, quoting, is rigorous coursework. Let me read to you from the Center for State Policy Analysis at Tufts, who I think does the best job of analyzing fairly both sides of this question. Let me read to you. Most states base their graduation standards on course requirements rather than test scores. So if the vast majority of states, who I assume care about their kids as well, have determined that, I'll use Deb's words, rigorous coursework, or Evan Horowitz, who runs the center, course requirements rather than test scores, it's working for them. Why shouldn't it work for us?
It's not solely based on coursework. there's also assessment data that is utilized.
But
in
there's
this
not a
question.
high-stakes graduation
Right.
test in the vast
So
majority of
it's
states.
a question of what we're talking about, high stakes, and Deb was
I tell you
talking
what
about.
I mean by high
Yeah.
stakes is you can't graduate if you don't pass it. That isn't the case in the vast majority of states.
So there are actually growing requirements, and Massachusetts is actually looked at as the gold standard in terms of our graduation requirement. I was actually just talking to the state chief of North Dakota the other day, who was laughing, saying Massachusetts is going to get rid of MCAS. We're actually adding to our state graduation requirement, adding things around cybersecurity and digital literacy and financial literacy, not taking things away. So the fact that we are the leader in the nation, #1 in the nation, and part of that is because of the assessment
It's us.
and the ability to say these are districts that are doing well. Here is how they resource these districts.
Do you think all
Here's how
those
we
states, the
reallocate.
majority of states that don't have that pass or fail or don't graduate, are they failing their kids in your estimation?
that pass or fail?
Those
Really
who
what it
don't have a graduation requirement test like we do, the vast majority of states, are they failing their kids?
I wouldn't say that they're failing their kids, but we really don't know. And that's the problem, is that we're graduating kids and we're throwing them into a competitive environment with all these other kids from other states, and then having the expectation that, hey, good luck to you, hope it
Just
goes well.
one thing on that, please.
without-
Yeah, Deb McCarthy.
Well, thank you very much. Again, from the Department of Education from this morning on their webpage, MassCore Pathway, students who take a challenging program of study like MassCore in high school are more likely to enroll in college, forego academic remediation, and earn a college degree.
But Deb,
And
if
when-
I may, you've read repeatedly from DESE's
Right.
website. DESE is part of the Department of Education.
right.
The guy who runs the Department of Education is voting no and is advocating
And it's-
strongly for a no
Well,
vote on
that's
this question.
why
There's a
I
s-
think that there's an issue here, because all of the information that shows that our students are being harmed by the high stakes of this requirement, and that the alternative is effective, is
Where does DESE say that they're
Excuse
being
me,
harmed?
there's a fact
Sorry, go ahead.
issue here that I think we should straighten
Okay.
out. I don't know what they say on their website, but in a long piece in the Boston Globe, and it was from
Well,
this organization.
Massachusetts Equity.
No, it's by a coalition member of this something. Yeah, the Voice for Academic Equity. But
You can
points out
respond,
that
Deb, in a second.
Massachusetts is only one of 2 states, including Vermont, that do not require high schools to complete certain coursework, like the MassCore. And the State Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed, DESE, only requires kids to pass the MCAS and not this required coursework, MassCore. Only half of the students have
Even
that.
have access.
Yeah, so that's just a fact check.
Well, I'm just telling you from their site, right, and all of the districts that do it. I actually was really surprised, because where I'm from in Hull, I thought everyone had to do the MassCore. When you talk to people, I thought it was a standard. Then what you find out is it is an equity issue, that when you talk to some of these superintendents, because it's an unfunded mandate,
Yeah,
they
it's
can't
recommended.
afford-
It's recommended,
It's
not
strongly
re- yeah,
recommended.
but
And
not
so,
requ-
once
yeah.
again, it's an equity issue, because taking these MassCore pathway is more indicative of success
Deb,
than a
if I may,
one-time snapshot.
Keri wants to respond, but I wanted just to get a quick answer from you. I think we all know the answer. When you've quoted from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, nowhere in their website do they say that the graduation requirement test harms students. Is that correct? That is
Do
correct.
they say that?
Yeah, they don't, right? I mean,
No,
you're
no,
quoting
no,
from.
no.
Okay, fine.
No, no, no.
What were you going to say,
So
Keri?
to this issue of harm, I think we have to address this. This has been a 20-year-long campaign from the Massachusetts Teachers Association to get rid of the MCAS exam.
No.
They have spent millions of dollars. They've stood up other organizations like Fair Test and Citizens for Public Schools, trying to convince us to opt out of the test. When you take a look at how parents and families actually feel about this test, what you need to look at, you don't have to take my word for it, you don't have to take her word for it, take a look at student participation data in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. How many parents make sure that their kid takes the MCAS exam every single year?
Why are the
In
polling-
most
why are
communities,
polling
it's
numbers-
98, 99%.
We have 3 weeks to go. Well, early voting starts on Saturday, but we have 3 weeks to go to Election Day. Why are polling numbers showing a significant majority, I guess you could say, of people so far, which includes, I assume, a huge number of parents, actually support the elimination of MCAS?
Well, I honestly think that there has been a lot of manipulation in this campaign and distortion of the facts and the presumption that, hey, you know, if we get rid of MCAS, we're going to have something better. There is nothing better. This is going to lead to chaos. So when we talk about what we're going to do and what's going to happen, none of that is part of the ballot question. There is not a new statewide assessment. There's been a lot of
What
rhetoric
does happen?
around
That's a good
that.
question.
It's
What does
not. There's no plan.
I wanna
many people
address the
vote-
chaos
no,
and
I
the
want you, I
parents.
want you to address, if you would, because
Yeah.
time is short. What happens if people do vote
What's
yes?
happening right
what
now?
follows?
Exactly what is happening right
Which
now.
is?
The incredible standards are in place. Students don't just pass the MCAS and then get a diploma. They have to meet the local metrics. It's a two.
Yeah, but
two
local
requirements.
metrics can be, as Marjorie said,
Can be in-
dramatically
But they're not.
different from
But
one
they're
community.
not. They're
Well,
not.
I think
And
they
so the only
absolutely
difference is, and the parent thing really isn't fair, because we had a grassroots, parents volunteering, collected 5,000 signatures in the South Shore, parents of students on IEPs who they know exactly what the language
Okay,
is.
I gotta
in
hold-
your
I gotta
home-
hold you
hold
both.
on.
I
In
gotta
your
hold- I'm
home-
sorry, hold on.
In
I
your
got-
home community
Keri-
of Hull last year, 100% of 10th graders took the MCAS exam.
Okay, I got to hold you both
So-
because we're almost out of time. Each of you have, let's start with you, Deb McCarthy. You have 30 seconds or so to sort of wrap up why you want people to vote yes on question 2.
Because it is time to stop tying the attainment of a high school diploma to a snapshot of a one-time metric. We know better, we need to do better. The grand bargain provided money, not enough. We have the standards, but we haven't looked at this assessment, and we are harming the same populations of students over and over and over again. And morally, it's wrong.
Why should people vote no? Wrap it up, if you will, Keri Rodrigues, please.
Well, I will tell you, as the child or a mother of a child with special needs who just last year passed the MCAS exam as a 10th grader while in a therapeutic high school in Massachusetts, kids like mine are capable of passing MCAS. Every child in Massachusetts is capable, and we should be honoring our commitment to getting them not just to proficiency but excellence, because we are not just preparing them to accept a diploma at the end of the stage. We need to prepare them to be competitive in a global economy and be ready for the jobs and economy of the future. And we are not doing this if we're just handing out report cards based on a vibe and hoping for the best.
Let
Our
her
kids
finish.
deserve
Let her
better
finish,
than that.
please.
This is a matter of education justice and keeping our promises, because the kids in Wellesley should not have to meet a higher standard than the kids in Lawrence. And this is how we make sure that all of the inequities that are within our system are addressed,
Keri,
is through this data.
does the Vote No site have a website?
They sure do.
What is it?
You're killing
If you tell us in a minute,
Yes.
we'll announce
Yes
it.
on 2.
What's a yes?
Yes on 2.
Yes on 2.
Dot what? Org,
Just so,
com?
yeah, it is incredible.
No,
Number
but-
2, the number 2,
Yeah.
right?
Yes
on
on
2.
2.
Okay.
.org or .com? Do you-
I believe it's .org.
Dot
but-
.org. Okay, fair enough. And
Yeah.
you'll let us know.
Yes,
and we'll announce
sorry
on
about
the air.
that. I'm blanking.
We appreciate
right.
both your time. Thank you so much for
very,
being
very
here.
much
Thank
for coming
you.
in. We have been speaking with Deb
Yeah.
McCarthy, Vice President of the Massachusetts Teachers Association, representing the Yes on Question 2 side, and Keri Rodrigues, founder of the National Parents Union, representing the No side. Thank you both very much for coming in.